304 people died inside a ferry that sank very slowly. There were helicopters, rescue boats, live television cameras, and hundreds of people watching. But most of the victims never even tried to escape. They remained sitting inside their cabins because the ship's speakers kept repeating, "Please stay where you are." That is why many students never made it outside again. And the first person to call emergency services was not the captain, but a 17-year-old student. This was Sewol, one of the most haunting disasters in modern Korean history. The first person to call for help. The ferry had not sunk yet. Nobody was screaming, nobody was running. There was only a slight tilt. A soda can rolled across the floor, then stopped. A few students laughed. They thought the ferry was only turning. A boy bent down and picked up his phone. The screen showed Mom. Third missed call. He still had not called back. "I'm on a school trip." Then the ferry tilted again, harder this time. Chairs slid across the room. Suitcases slammed into walls. One student fell into the hallway. Then the announcement came through the speakers. Passengers are advised to remain where they are. A very ordinary sentence. A single sentence that was about to kill hundreds of people. The boy looked around the cabin. His classmates were wearing life jackets. Some were still forcing nervous smiles because the adults were not panicking yet, so they believed everything was still under control. Then his phone vibrated again. Mom calling. This time he answered. "Mom, I think something's wrong with the ship." Behind him, things were crashing to the floor. Someone had started crying. The boy turned toward a teacher nearby. She was gripping the wall, her face completely pale. He handed her the phone. "Please, talk to her." But she could not speak. Only heavy breathing and one quiet sentence. "Please." Finally, the boy took the phone back and called emergency services himself. "Please come quickly. There are many students here. The ship is tilting." He tried to keep his voice calm, as if staying calm would make adults arrive faster. That was the first emergency call. And the first person to realize something was terribly wrong was a child. The school trip. Nobody thought they were going to die. Spring 2014. More than 300 high school students left the city of Ansan. They were heading toward Jeju Island for a 4-day school trip. Far enough to feel exciting, short enough that nobody imagined danger. Most of them were only 17, still young enough to believe adults always knew what to do. At Incheon port, thick fog covered the sea. Some ships were delayed, but eventually the Sewol Ferry was still allowed to depart. Students rolled suitcases on board. Some filmed videos, some took selfies. Some called their parents. "We're on the ship now." Nobody knew those would become their final conversations. The Sewol had originally been an old Japanese ferry. After being purchased, it was remodeled to carry more passengers, more cabins, more cargo, more profit, but also far less stability. That morning, the ferry was carrying excessive cargo weight. Shipping containers stacked high, heavy trucks, large steel cargo. And inside the cabins, hundreds of students were sleeping that night. The ferry held live music. There were fireworks, birthday cakes, students laughing in hallways, some listening to ghost stories, some standing outside on deck watching the ocean at night. None of them knew. By the next morning, the ship itself would become a giant trap. The order, stay where you are, 8:48 a.m. The Sewol suddenly changed direction, then tilted violently. Containers began falling into the sea. Metal crashed throughout the ship. Inside the cabins, students fell on top of one another. Luggage slid through hallways. Glass shattered. People screamed. But the strangest thing was that nobody ordered an evacuation. Instead, the speakers kept repeating, "Passengers are advised to remain where they are. Do not move. Stay inside your cabins." And those students obeyed. Some put on life jackets. Some sat against the walls. Some sent messages. "Mom, the ship is tilting badly." Some wrote, "I love you." But their voices still had not fully become panic, because outside the windows, the sea still looked calm. And in their minds, adults would arrive soon. That is the most painful thing about Sewol. Not everyone died immediately. They had time to hope, time to wait, time to believe everything would still be okay. Outside the ship, the entire country was watching. While the students remained inside the cabins, outside, rescue boats began arriving. Helicopters circled overhead. Civilian fishing boats moved closer. Live television cameras started broadcasting. The entire country watched in real time. But something felt deeply wrong. The ship was sinking, yet almost nobody was in the water. The first fishermen arriving at the scene later said they could not understand what they were seeing. If a ship was sinking, people should have been trying to escape, but the deck was almost empty. Nobody knew hundreds of students were still trapped inside, still sitting quietly, still listening to the announcements. Meanwhile, false reports began spreading. Most passengers have been rescued. There are no major casualties. Parents watching television began crying with relief. Then they called their children, but nobody answered anymore. Only final text messages remained. "I love you, Mom. I miss Dad." Don't worry. What nobody realized was that those students were still waiting. The people who left and the people who couldn't. As the Sewol tilted further, some passengers began escaping on their own. They climbed railings, grabbed rescue ropes, jumped into the freezing water. Some survived. Later, many survivors repeated the same sentence. The people who disobeyed were the ones who lived. Inside the cabins, many students remained where they were because they believed if adults told them to stay still, that must be the safest thing to do. The captain of the Sewol, the the person who understood the situation better than anyone became one of the first people to leave the ship. He stepped onto a rescue boat while hundreds of students remained trapped inside. That was the moment many people in South Korea lost faith in adults completely. The water rises. Time runs out. Inside the ferry, the lights began failing. Seawater entered the hallways, ankles, knees, chest level. Some students tried climbing onto doors. Some smashed windows. Some called out their friends' names. A few used phone screens as flashlights, small lights glowing in darkness. Then, one by one, they disappeared. Divers later described the inside of Sewol as a maze. Furniture blocking exits, electrical wires wrapping around bodies, water so dark they could not see anything. They moved centimeter by centimeter through the wreck. Some victims still held phones in their hands. Some died holding on to each other. Some never had the chance to become adults. One diver later said, "The hardest part was knowing many of them might have survived if help had arrived sooner." After the ship disappeared, the silence never ended. When the Sewol finally vanished beneath the water, everything did not end. It only began. Parents gathered at the harbor, waiting for survivor lists, calling phones endlessly. Nobody answered anymore. Many parents kept their children's final text messages forever, unable to delete them. Many divers suffered severe psychological trauma afterward. Some could no longer sleep. Some said they still heard voices calling for help inside their heads. Some later took their own lives. Sewol did not only kill the people on board, it continued destroying the people who survived. Afterward, investigations began. Why was the ferry overloaded? Why was evacuation delayed? Why were false reports released? Why did nobody act fast enough? But for many families, those questions no longer mattered, because the only thing they wanted was for their children to come home. And that would never happen. They waited. Some disasters happen too fast for people to understand what is happening. But Sewol was different. The ship sank very slowly. Slowly enough for hundreds of students to believe they would still be rescued. That was the cruelest part. Not the seawater, not the darkness, but hope. Hope that adults would come back. Those students did not rebel. They did not run. They followed every rule they had been taught. Sit still, wait, trust adults. The first person to call emergency services was a student. And nearly an hour later, after the captain had already escaped, many students were still inside the ship, sitting quietly, because they believed the adults would return for them. But nobody came back. And the thing that sank beneath the ocean that day was not only a ferry, but the belief that adults always know what to do.